Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rapture Radio Rewind. I am one of your co-hosts, Odhrán Johnson. I am joined by my good friend Conor Smith. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at PlayStation's decision to retain the PS3 and PS Vita store after the backlash from consumers. We'll also be taking a look at why former Days Gone director John Garvin is in the news this week, and we'll end the show off with our indie titles of the week, along with one piece of smaller news we want to talk about. With that being said, welcome to Rapture Radio Rewind. So I want to start off, first of all, Conor, this week with the obvious news that we had initially planned to cover as PlayStation shutting down their stores. But since then, they had then released a statement saying that they're actually going to be keeping open the PS3 and PS Vita stores. The PSP stores or whatever, if anyone is still using that, will not be going ahead after July 2nd, 2021. But I think the interesting thing we saw about it was there was a lot of people very annoyed about this, and I think for justifiable reasons as well. I have the statement in front of me that they were going through, and some of the bits that I found really, I suppose, quite amusing in a sense was that they were kind of saying that they had initially planned to end the whole store on PlayStation 3 and PS Vita because it wasn't being used by people as much as the newer stores, which is quite humorous in a sense, because they then say at the end, they're like, oh, we're so glad that we were able to find a solution to continue these operations. And it's like, well, you didn't want to continue these operations. So, I mean, I can't imagine it was too much of a financial burden on them if they're willing to kind of cave into that sort of community backlash so easily. I think one of the things we were talking about earlier in the week is that it reminds us very much of the sort of the consumer backlash that Microsoft endured when they threatened to, well, not even threatened, but just announced that they were going to be upping the price for, I believe it was just Xbox Live Gold at the time. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
I'm interested to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, this is a win for consumers at the end of the day, but is this something that we're seeing a worrying, growing trend in?
What, this sort of a backlash commanding what these corporations actually end up doing? Well, I think it was just confusing to see PlayStation wanting to close the stores, because I mean, it's not like they've brought out a handheld to replace the Vita. I can't imagine many more games are being made for Vita, but I think I did see one developer at least say that they were in development and cancelled the game when they heard that they were shutting the stores. I think it's just confusing for consumers, because obviously you look at the competition, and on Xbox you can buy games all the way back to the original Xbox games. You know, I've got plenty of original Xbox games on my Xbox. So, you know, just remarkably strange to have the competition speak all about backwards compatibility, and PlayStation just like, no, we're getting rid of the past, getting rid of all the backlog. I don't know what they were expecting, really. It might have been something they wanted to do for a long time just because of funds, but yeah, I think we are seeing this type of backlash a lot. I mean, we've seen it with the Snyder Cut, the sort of fan campaign. We've seen it with Xbox increasing the price of gold, and you get all these people pop up and say, well, all I pay for is gold, and now you're going to force me into Game Pass, so I'm not going to play Game Pass. And as strange as those people might be, because obviously Game Pass is wonderful, but you know, they're still out there, and you've got to accommodate for all your consumers. And I think that due to platforms like Twitter, companies are much more easily able to hear immediately reactions to their decisions and what the consumers want. I think it's ultimately a positive, as long as, you know, communities don't get too toxic and start turning on developers. But I can't imagine that. The thing is that the consumers know what they want, and if you want kind of brand loyalty and to be pleasing the people you're making games for and stuff, I mean, it's a win. It probably drove like a surge of people buying loads of PS3 games and Vita games just in case the stores closed. So they probably made money off of this. So I reckon it was probably a win-win all round.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see that PlayStation haven't really delved into that backwards compatibility aspect until, I suppose you can probably look at more recently the fact that a lot of PS4 titles are, I think of all PS4 titles are playable on PlayStation 5. But bar that, there hasn't been much in the sort of realm of backwards compatibility. I think, which is surprising again, because I think a lot of people during the era of the PlayStation 3, I think there was a very specific PlayStation 3 you could get which would allow you to play PlayStation 1 games on it. And that was sort of a beloved sort of thing by the community at the time, and they were kind of calling out for this backwards compatibility model, similar to what Xbox have now. It's really, really strange because in the statement as well, the PlayStation team put down, I'm glad that we can keep this piece of our history alive for gamers to enjoy. And it's like, but like, are you though? Like, it's very, like, it's kind of like, oh, we've been caught out, so now we kind of have to say this. It just feels empty and flat, if I'm honest, because, you know, if they were so wanting to keep this history alive, they would have implemented something like backwards compatibility, or they just wouldn't have gone to the length of, you know, destroying these marketplaces without giving players an option of getting it somewhere else. I think the important thing as well about PlayStation is that there's a lot of PlayStation 3 games that haven't seen either a sequel or a remaster on the PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 to justify getting rid of them. I think one that pops into mind is Sly Cooper, which is very much a beloved series on the PlayStation 3, is kind of being shunned away almost. I believe it's streamable via whatever PlayStation's equivalent of Game Pass is. I think it's PlayStation Plus. But like, bar that, like, you're kind of like, why would you make such an error in judgment at a stage when people are already kind of disappointed in the sort of shady practices that are going on with PlayStation regarding consumers? I think I saw a very interesting argument there recently, because as we talk about, you know, handheld consoles not really being as prevalent anymore, particularly there's a lot of discussion around whether Xbox is going to release a handheld console. We talked about the PS Vita and it not really having an update in recent, and obviously the Switch kind of dominates that market at the moment. A very interesting thing I saw, there was a video by Lucas Reykjavik on YouTube, and he was talking about sort of cloud gaming and what it was like and how to get into it. And one thing you mentioned, which I think is a very valid point, is for a lot of people it's very much in its infancy, and very few games run at a very consistent level on these sort of streaming platforms. And it's something that, you know, Xbox have started, you know, stepping their foot into that sort of pool that is, I mean, untouched. Like, you know, you think PlayStation would jump at the idea of maybe porting over a few of those PS Vita titles onto the phone for people to play on the go, because I think if you were to compare any mobile device, it probably has better hardware in a lot of cases than the old PS Vita. So it's an interesting premise, and I kind of be interested, maybe, what do you think about that sort of idea? Is it a sort of a missed marketing opportunity for them to kind of jump into that market?
Yeah, I mean, they could have done. You know, it's hard to say, isn't it? I don't know if all if many Vita games would be compatible on the phone. I have to admit, I don't play many games on my phone, at least not games that, you know, are meant for a handheld and then, you know, suddenly have touch controls put in. So I personally don't really know how that kind of audience likes to play their games. You know, you've definitely got to keep the old games alive. I liked seeing that they had kind of PS1 classic games on the Vita, so I could play kind of Abe's Odyssey and Final Fantasy VII on the PS Vita when I had one. It's just a really strange decision, and you know what? It's really reminiscent of where Xbox were at the turn of the last generation when they came out the Xbox One, and they had some strange decisions. You know, things like you couldn't pass on a disc once you'd used it, and I think they were trying to get rid of backwards compatibility a little bit too. So obviously there is a desire to not carry on these kind of backlogs. The one thing I've really heard people say is that really when you think of PlayStation, you recognize the name Jim Ryan, but there's no personalities or faces you can latch onto. Whereas now Xbox are at a point where you can see Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond, Aaron Greenberg, sort of all of the Team Xbox people. And I think at the time when they were going to raise the gold and they announced it, I think Phil Spencer actually came out and said, he was on a voice chat with Major Nelson, and they were saying what a tough day it was because they knew it wasn't the right thing. And just having that kind of personality, or those personalities behind that brand, you get more of a sense that there are people there and they understand you and they are gamers as well. If I was going to kind of look at PlayStation and try and understand the kind of decisions that they were making, there's no one I can go to and kind of understand or really see behind the scenes on these decisions. And that, I think that probably leaves consumers a little cold. So when you announce a decision like this, like they're shutting down the stores, it comes across as really impersonal and almost a bit of a, just not very nice at all for your audience. I mean, Xbox, I think Halo announced that they were going to shut down all the old servers for like Halo 3, Halo Reach. But, you've got Master Chief Collection, so you don't even need to go on the 360 versions of those games. And, very little amount of people do. And to be honest, for me personally, I wouldn't see the point of going back and playing on the old servers just because I doubt anyone's really playing on them. So Xbox, obviously, they wouldn't, at the moment, the way they're going, they're not going to shut something down if they can't replace it. So yeah, it's just confusing all around. But I honestly do hope PlayStation find a way to just keep their games alive and, really honor like every game that has came before, because, gamers, they're attached to their not just new games coming out all the time. They're attached to the first games they played and their memories of them. So you can't just erase them.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And it was a really interesting move in the sense that, there's been such a big push in recent years to move to solely digital purchasing on games consoles. We obviously see recently, both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One had a digital version, and now the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series S, I believe, is a digital version. So there's a big move from these companies to, move away from the physical handheld disc and go towards this digital market. And I think the only real reason that they're kind of maybe still doing discware is to keep certain companies happy, like GameStop and Game, so that they'll still sell their consoles. And I can see that being sort of something they'll phase out in the future. But it's just like, if they're going for that model, why would you get rid of the digital stores then? Because that's just going to lead everyone to either, first of all, having to maybe, track down extremely rare copies of games that they could maybe have bought on the store, because there's obviously a finite amount of, physical copies, whereas, on the store you can get as many as you want. Or it's going to turn people towards emulators, which, companies in the past have been, specifically Sony and PlayStation, have cracked down on very big, on like, a lot of times, saying that these are illegal practices, that they shouldn't be allowed. But in fairness, and I don't want to speak to emulators, because I think in a lot of ways, when a game is new and it comes out and someone emulates it, that's a really poor, shady practice. But for something as historic as, games that aren't available to purchase anymore on a digital store, it's kind of really playing into the hands of people who use emulators. Because now they have a reason and they have a justification for using this market. Because, the big companies over at Sony and, not Microsoft, but the big company over at Sony doesn't want us to be able to play Sly Cooper or the original Ratchet and Clank on digital anymore. So I might as well just go and play it over on this emulator. So yeah, a really weird move. I am happy though to see that it's been kind of redacted, and I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, it shows the power of sort of communities within the gaming sphere now. I think it's always a case that when something like this happens, there's always very much cross-platform support. So, people on PC, people on Xbox, people on PlayStation, they could sympathize with these sort of struggles as well. So they're always, willing to lend their voice towards it as well, which I think is really interesting. And plus, it means that something like this probably won't happen in the foreseeable future again, I wouldn't say. let's have a look now as to why John Garvin is in the news. So for those who don't know, John Garvin is the former director of Days Gone, which was a sort of I believe a third-person open world zombie shooter game that released for the PlayStation 4. It's an alright game. This is my own personal take on the game. I kind of got it. This is actually going to lend itself into the conversation because I bought it on sale at the time during the Christmas sales. And, it's a decent game. I haven't returned to it recently in a couple of months, but that's due to just time restrictions and then getting the Series X and whatnot. So maybe I will go back to it at some stage. But I think what I've heard this week has kind of put a bitter taste in my mouth regarding not everyone behind it, but at least the director behind the game. So for those who aren't aware, he was on a podcast this week with a fellow former Sony developer, David Jaffe, I want to say, or Jaffe, and they were talking about just everything games in general. Now I have to admit, it's a 4-hour podcast. I didn't get to listen to all of it. I listened specifically to the part that we're going to be talking about today, which is the quote from Garvin, which says, "If you love a game, buy it at full fucking price." And I can kind of, I don't want to say I can see where he's coming from, because I think that's an absolutely ludicrous statement to make, because that ignores a lot of the social pressures that people are under, specifically if they can't afford to be spending $60 to $70 on a full priced game at launch. I want to throw the ball over to you here for Conor for this, because it'd be an interesting one to talk about, because I have a few bits that I'd like to delve into, but maybe let's just get your perspective on it first of all.
I thought it was a fair comment. I think that the way he's worded it has perhaps not attracted the most favorable comments. But when we looked at the Falconeer over on the Unofficial Game Pass podcast, we said, if you really love this game, support it and buy it at full price. So I don't think it's that strange to hear a developer saying, if you love my game, go buy it. Personally, my reaction to this was, because the context that he's talking about is that at launch the game did not sell as much as he wanted it to, I believe. Mm-hmm. And that many people discovered Days Gone through PS Plus, and many people really, really liked it. They thought it was a great zombie game, and are left wanting more. The problem with PS Plus, and I saw this story as like a symptomatic of the business model of PS Plus, because obviously if you're a PlayStation user, I think it's fair to say that you can probably be subscribed to PS Plus all the time when you're on PlayStation, just because the amount of games that you get every month and how they build up into your library. You're going to end up with a library, like a huge library of games, or of good games as well. So, if you're a PlayStation user, I don't understand why you wouldn't have PS Plus, first of all. And then, because the model of PS Plus is you get given a game every month, and as long as you have that subscription, you keep that game. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is that everyone who discovers it through PS Plus, everyone who plays it and keeps it through PS Plus, is not going to be encouraged to buy that game. And yeah, you can say, if people don't want to pay for PS Plus and they stop their subscription, they're gonna buy Days Gone. But I think it's more likely that they're just gonna buy PS Plus back again, because it's not like it's not gonna be there when they get it back. And if you compare it to Game Pass, which is like a tailored or curated collection of games, and every fortnight or whatever, they bring more games in, and every fortnight a few games leave as well. And that idea of impermanence, of this game is going to be on Game Pass, you can play it, you can see if you like it, you can play it for as long as it's on Game Pass, and obviously with the first-party Xbox games, Studios games, they'll always be there. But for most of those games, if they come to Game Pass and you really like them, you're going to feel like, oh, I want to buy this because I want to have this all the time, even when it's not on Game Pass. Mm-hmm. So in that way, Game Pass has found a way to give consumers more games, which is fantastic. That's what they want. And they've also found a way to encourage consumers to spend more and support the developers that are providing the games. It's a win-win scenario. And they've showed the figures. They've showed that people who have Game Pass play more and spend more. Now maybe that that encourages you not to get Game Pass because you think, oh, I don't want to spend loads on loads of games. But then a game that comes to Game Pass, if their game being on Game Pass and the amount of money they get through it supports their next game, that's well worth it. Whereas if something comes to PS Plus like Days Gone has, and the developer isn't getting money for people playing their game, that is I feel the tragedy in that. So I do sympathize with the developer, but you sounded like you were going to view it slightly harshly, so I want to hear your opinion as well.
Yeah, I don't very much have any sympathy for the director of Days Gone, to be honest. I think from the clip I listened to anyways, and I was watching on from the point of when he brought this up, a lot of it was surrounding the conversation, I believe, of a lot of people asking, well, why isn't there a Days Gone sequel? And that's because I think it financially didn't perform very well, and because I think the awkward thing about this is because, and what makes me feel like it's in some sort of not a great place to be bringing it up, is he mentions that you should buy it at full price at launch. And I think this is a symptom of the industry really at the moment, is because consumers don't know what they're getting at launch anymore, because there's so many games releasing that aren't fully finished, that have broken elements to them, that, don't justify paying full price. I think consumers at this stage have, for the most part, lost trust in a lot of big company developers to release something at launch. And, I think maybe it's certain studios that have lost that respect. I know CD Projekt Red is the most recent one to have succumbed to that, because they had a load of consumer trust with previous Witcher games, and then out comes Cyberpunk and it's a complete mess at launch, and now people are annoyed by it. I think Outriders is another perfect example we talked about on the Game Pass podcast. How it wasn't working with servers at launch, how stuff was crashing constantly, people were having trouble with it. But I think you made a very good point. People have the choice to not pay for that. First of all, they get to enjoy it for free. And this is a good point that Garvin brought up in the piece I was listening to, because he said, how do you know you're going to like a game if you don't get to play it first? Which I think is a fair point. And I think in one half, PlayStation need to either create a similar model to Game Pass, or they need to start getting back into the more sort of demo style stuff of allowing people to have a certain level of time on the game before they have to purchase it. Because this is one reason, again, I don't have much sympathy for Garvin when he's talking about his game, about buying the game at full price. He tried to compare it to the point that God of War on the PlayStation 4 had a huge opening day weekend. I was like, yes, that's fine, and you like that comparison would work if you didn't know the context behind what God of War is in comparison to what Days Gone is. God of War is a long established franchise with a lot of consumer trust. So obviously it's going to sell a load of copies at launch because it's so well trusted. Days Gone is made by very much, if you're just an average gamer, a very, it's just, I think at the time it came out as well, just another zombie game that people weren't really expecting to be good. And granted, I enjoy Days Gone. I think it's a good game. But I wouldn't be walking into this saying you need to buy this at full price on launch, or else you don't love the game or you don't support the developer, because that's absolute nonsense, to be honest. As we mentioned, games are doing significantly better now on the Game Pass model than some of them probably would have done if they just released. Outriders again was brought up in the interview I was watching, and it launched on the service, and it didn't have its sales negatively affected. So you're looking at an audience that's been brought in without having to spend full price on the game. Granted, and let's take into account as well, if you have Game Pass, you're getting a discount on that title. Granted, it's not a huge discount, but still not full price, and it's making it a big retraction in income. One very interesting piece I saw, kind of maybe delving into why Days Gone didn't perform as well as Garvin had hoped. There was a tweet by Matt Piscatella, who previously worked for Activision and Warner Bros. In business and sales planning. So he kind of said that this is the tweet. I'll just read it out now. If a game didn't sell well at launch, it's most likely because the game, its marketing, or its price failed to incentivize customers to purchase. Blaming the consumer for a game not selling well at launch is a bit off the rails. And I do agree with that statement generally. Like, I think the only sort of recollection I have of Days Gone, and this is coming from someone who, at the time, I don't think I paid too much attention to PlayStation because I didn't own a PS4 at the time. But I was still kind of, looking at the exclusives that come out in PlayStation, as anyone with a keen interest in games would. Days Gone, I think, had one very big trailer which showed a flock of zombies herding after you. And that's all I remember from Days Gone. I don't remember anything else being brought up about it. It seemed after that quite a generic game of just a dude on a bike killing zombies, right? And that sounds like a cool premise, but I didn't hear anything about it. Even when it launched, I heard very little about Days Gone. And okay, I kind of want to, I want to bring it back to one other bit, and I swear I'll throw the ball back over into your court for a second, but just I think that whole comparison of God of War is just so ridiculous. Like, it's so stupid. Like to try it, like that'd be like me coming out and saying, let's say for example, now this is completely like hypothetical statement, but let's say for example Thomas Salah came out and he was like, oh, I was really annoyed that a load of people didn't buy the Falconeer when it launched, and then he'd be like, look at how well Halo 5 did on launch. It's like, yeah, well obviously Halo 5 is a much bigger title and you wouldn't be saying that. And again, maybe it's a bit of an unfair comparison to compare Days Gone to an indie title, but like if you're looking at it at the same level, I think maybe a better way of phrasing it would be maybe something like what's it, sort of a low IP Xbox game that kind of comes out?
Outriders.
Yeah, like let's say if Outriders came out and it didn't perform well, let's say, because this is another good point to bring in as well, is that Outriders I think performed very well, not solely because it was on Game Pass, but because there was no competition at the time when it came out. No other games were coming out at the time. You look at Days Gone when it came out, Mortal Kombat 11 was coming around the corner, as was Rage 2. Granted, they're not the biggest games in the world, but I'd say they're on the same level of platform as something like Days Gone would be. And it occupies that similar sort of level in the market as to where people will be putting their money into it. And of course, again, there's no incentivized to get it on Game Pass and try all of them and pick whichever one's your favorite. One other thing I want to say, this was brought up in the interview, and I think it's an interesting point, is that Metacritic scores by reviewers will negatively impact how a game sells on launch, and I think that is true. But like, yeah, sure, you're gonna get your odd share of poor reviews because people don't enjoy your game, and sure, yeah, we all know the meme of, oh, journalists can't play games, this, that, and the other, which I think is really not true, to be honest. I think there's a load of really talented games journalists out there that know what they're talking about, probably more so than the average Joe who's going to buy a game. It's just the few ones that, who played Doom poorly get always thrown under the dirt. I mean, in fairness as well, and good reason. But if you look at the Metacritic scores for something like Days Gone, it went down as low as 3 out of 10, and then there was some 10 out of 10s. Then again, let's just say, for example, we bring up God of War. The lowest score God of War got in a Metacritic score was 7.5 out of 10. Now, and this is coming from someone, in fairness, I'm going to say this, and this probably isn't a popular opinion. I don't really like the new God of War game. I find it really boring and repetitive, and I actually prefer Days Gone's overall gameplay status to that of God of War. But I can understand why that would resonate with a lot of people, and specifically game journalists and game players and whatnot. So, like, the option of either, you can't blame the reviewers either, because that's their job, is to review. Would you rather that nobody reviewed your games? Because, like, at the end of the day, then consumers don't know what they're going to be buying, and that leaves them even more, disincentivized to purchase that product. I think at the end of the day, I don't know, I think he's kicking up a fuss about nothing, really, to be honest. I think it's really, like, it's easy for someone who's, being there is a little salty now that they're no longer in that company and they're just kind of giving out for the sake of giving out at this stage. He tried to clarify his stuff on later. He said on Twitter after that, I believe it was, if you think games cost too much, more power to you. Just don't buy a game on sale a year later. Discover you love it, then wonder why a sequel's never got made. Like, that's a completely arrogant statement to make surrounding a consumer buying a game. People probably, there's so many people who can't afford to be spending 70 quid on a game every time it comes out. And, like, nobody's expecting that. And there is a big question mark over whether games are getting way too expensive now. I personally think, in fairness, if a game's done right, I don't mind spending the 70 quid on it. Granted, I haven't spent 70 quid on a game in years, because I don't think I've ever played a game that I feel like deserves it. But it's just like, it's a ridiculous statement to say that you need to buy a game at full price to support it. any money going towards a game is supporting that game. You know, support for a game is not just buying it on launch, it's continually playing it, promoting it as well. You know, getting the word out there, because, you know, let's look at some of the greatest games of all time, right? And this is very subjective, right? Let's say something like Half-Life. Half-Life by no means, maybe at the time of the market came out, it was considered a reasonably priced game. You look at Half-Life down the line, Half-Life hasn't survived because it, you know, got a load of sales at launch. It survived because it has a core dedicated fan base that really enjoy it. And I feel like if Days Gone didn't have a core fan base, we wouldn't be hearing about it now. You know, like, there's a lot of PlayStation exclusives that have gone under the radar over the years that have really underperformed, and people may have been like, could have easily applied this argument to it. But Days Gone has a good standing with a lot of PlayStation players because it has a core fan base. And that's what's keeping it alive. Not the fact that it didn't get, you know, a lot of money at launch or whatnot. There's plenty of games that first titles underperformed. Nair is a good example. That really underperformed when it first came out. And now the second one, Nair Automata, actually performed a lot better than what people were expecting. And the original is now getting a remaster. So, I mean, one other thing, the article I read surrounding this was on GameSpot, and it was originally from VGA. But I have to really admire the writer's sort of cheekiness at the end of it, because he then advertises at the end that the game's going to be free on PlayStation Plus, and then also links it to a, you know, $20 sale for the game on Walmart.com, which I thought I'd add that in the end. Yeah, so sorry, I droned on for a little bit, but yeah, no, I don't have much sympathy for him, to be honest. And I usually go into the intention of talking about developer, you know, that they generally have the best at heart for a player. But I feel like he went in really arrogantly, and, you know, even the follow-up afterwards, you know, it could have been said that maybe his stuff was taken out of context, but the follow-up afterwards just kind of confirms that for me.
But I mean, if you're saying that developers are arrogant to expect consumers to buy games on launch, and I'll preface this by saying, you know, a lot of people have lost trust in developers now. I think Cyberpunk has brought it to the forefront that even a developer you have trust in can fail and lose that trust. We've seen it happen now. As I said, I've pre-ordered Resident Evil Village, I've pre-ordered Back 4 Blood because I trust those developers. You know, I trust Capcom, I trust Turtle Rock. I trust them to deliver, and I look at the footage, I look at, you know, the various alphas and demos they've released, and, you know, if we're not getting like an Aliens Colonial Marines situation where they're just producing fake photos and fake videos, and if the footage looks honest. I mean, look at Halo Infinite. I mean, they didn't have the greatest showcase last July, but it was honest footage. They didn't alter it in any way. So, I mean, when you're buying a game on launch, yeah, you have to have trust there. So either you're going to buy God of War because you know the studio or you know the franchise and you do not expect it to fail you or let you down. Something like Days Gone, it, you know, quite easily slip under the radar. But if you're saying that, you know, developers are arrogant to want consumers to buy their game on launch day, I mean, launch day, when a game launches, that is their biggest opportunity to make a splash. I mean, that is when they get their sales. When their game comes out, the marketing leads up to it, and the first time it gets put on the store, that is when they'll get their sales. Like, they might get a featured spot. So if you're thinking about, like, when is my game gonna sell other than launch? Well, it's not gonna really sell, as we've talked about with PS Plus, because people are just gonna download it. Say, however, things like No Man's Sky or Subnautica or whatever, because I've noticed they're on Game Pass, or at least were on Game Pass, so I don't check it, you know, religiously. Games like that, you know, when they go to Game Pass, people think, oh wow, this has improved since launch, I'll go buy it. Or, you know, things that develop and are an ongoing project, like the developers keep adding to it. If you play it on Game Pass and go, whoa, this is, you know, way different to what I saw at launch, I'm going to go buy it. Game Pass is like the ultimate model for selling your game without having to, you know, have those sales at launch. Now, if you're like a PlayStation exclusive, you know, you don't have that model available to you. So you are going to rely on that launch. I think it's just, it's symptomatic. I think, if he's saying that if you want a sequel, you should buy it on launch. I mean, is that him saying that his company isn't going to make another game, or is he saying that the franchise isn't profitable? Because often with these games, like, they don't get their name recognized until they've had at least a sequel or two. As we talked about with Outriders, setting up a new IP is an uphill climb. I just think this shows a frustrated developer with kind of a very saturated market at the moment, and consumers who are getting smarter, quite frankly, and they're not willing to kind of splash their money on whatever. They're getting more picky, and they know when something looks bad. And if they could have seen like the true footage of Cyberpunk, no one would have bought it. But unfortunately, the hype actually,
Connor, even on that though, like, there were people who saw the flaws in Cyberpunk coming up to it. There were people questioning, like, well, why isn't there any previous gen sort of gameplay of this title? But a large reason was because they had trust in CD Projekt Red. But this, again, as I mentioned earlier, like, I don't think it's arrogant for a developer to ask people to buy a game at launch. It's just the way he goes about it, and the way he feels like he's entitled that every player who plays the game has to buy it full at launch. Because I think you're supporting a game by simply just playing it, to be honest. Because I would rather someone get a game for free and play it than not play it because they were locked out because it was too expensive for them to buy. Like, I think a lot of developers will agree with that as well. Obviously, I'm in really no position to say this just being a consumer of the product, but I've seen various indie developers online. One that comes to mind is David Szymanski, who is prominent developer with New Blood Interactive. He does a lot of games like Dusk, and he's working on Gloomwood at the moment. And he has said before, like, I would rather you pirate Dusk than not play it at all, because he knows that while a game is, for the most part, going to be sorry, losing my train of thought here for a second, but he knows for the most part that it's better for an individual to have experienced the title and enjoy it and support it, rather than just not play it at all because they can't afford it. Now, I want to preface this by saying, don't go out and pirate games. I don't think that's a good model. I think maybe David took it a little bit too far, and I wouldn't agree with that. I think it's a fair thing to say, though, that if something is on PS Plus, or something is on Xbox Game Pass, or something is on the Christmas sales or whatnot, you shouldn't have to feel guilty about buying it at a lower price point and feel like you're not supporting the dev or the game itself, because you are. You are supporting a game because you're showing an interest in it, and by you playing it, you are keeping the game alive. By you promoting it, you are keeping the game alive. I just think it's a really, really arrogant thing to say that somebody is not promoting a game because they simply haven't bought a game at launch, that for the most part they've only seen catered footage of the best parts of that game most of the time. And this is why I have a big problem with games coming out at launch. Most of the time you'll only see gameplay of a game on like the highest spec PC you'll ever find, even if it's console exclusive. It's like, well, that's not what I'm going to be playing, so I don't trust that. Like, you can look back, we mentioned Halo Infinite. Like, Halo has a history of, if you go back to Halo 2's days, of being, shady practice with regards to false advertisement of what was coming out at the time. And people at the time were angry about it. Now, they were lucky enough that Halo 2 happened to be a really good game. But, CD Projekt Red's a good example. Like, if the game looked a bit dodgy, but was still very good and functionable, people probably wouldn't have been, like, too bad. I think Spider-Man PS4 is a good example of this. It had... Insomniac Games, I think, came under a tiny bit of controversy because the game looked not significantly, but looked a bit better on their sort of their demos and their trailer footage as opposed to actual in-game. But the gameplay of that is just so fun, and it looks like a really good game anyways, that it wasn't a big problem. I think I think maybe he's frustrated, Connor, but I think he's directing his frustration at the wrong people. Like, if you want to give out about something, give out about PlayStation not, promoting a better platform for developers. Like, Steam is a good example of this as well. Like, their refund system is atrocious. Like, if you get a game, you have 4 hours and you can refund it up until any point. It just destroys short level games. So as we've mentioned before on multiple episodes of Game Pass podcast, some games with that Steam model have had to, really, really squeeze players in for 4 hours just so that they don't refund it. So that's what I just have a big problem. I feel like his frustration is ill placed, because you should never really target the consumer in this case, because the consumer at the most of the time is the person who's buying your game, the person who's enjoying your game, and the person who's giving you feedback. If someone doesn't like it, yeah, sure, that's their opinion, but like, that's not going to negatively impact your title if the vast majority of your fan base is still buying it, playing it, enjoying it, and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree. I think, ultimately when we come down to like what's important, I think, yeah, you should be happy if someone's playing your game. I feel like you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you say, paying for a game is not the only way to support it, right? Because I've seen Thomas Sala, developer of the Falconeer, on his Twitter complaining that you search for Falconeer and all the like kind of torrents come up for pirate copies and stuff. And obviously he doesn't want people to pirate his game. He'd love them to play it through Game Pass or buy the game.
Mm-hmm.
But saying that, if someone, say hypothetically, if someone pirated a game and then they went and streamed it to loads of viewers and they saw the game and they thought that looks pretty cool and they went and bought the game, I think you've done your bit. I mean, we've seen the gaming atmosphere change enough that streamers have like an extraordinary amount of influence on what people play. I mean, just look at Among Us. So, I think the gaming atmosphere has changed. You don't just need to rely on launch day sales.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's, I think, just symptomatic of how the developers feel and how the consumers feel, and yeah, I don't know how to end it. But
well, no, I just want to end on one other point, because it's really interesting that you bring up the idea of, say, someone who's pirated a game streams it and it encourages a couple more people to go and purchase the game. I think you could say maybe the ends justify the means in that case, but at the same time you'd rather they bought the game to begin with. But it's not too far off from the idea of journalists being giving a code for a game early for free to play it and then post their review, because as we mentioned, reviews will impact the sale of a game. I got a code for Dread X Collection The Hunt, and by no means do I think that my review of it has incentivized thousands of people to go and buy Dread X Collection The Hunt. But I do think that if you're going to give away free codes to those journalists to then go and pretty much in no uncertain words, PR your game if it's good, promote your game for all to see, why are you giving out to the consumers for not paying for it then, if you're willing to give out a free code to someone who at the end of the day you'll know it's good? For all the person who maybe got the game on sale is now being exposed to it. They'll go tell a friend about it. They'll then go and buy it, maybe if it's not on sale or whatever. Like, somebody getting the game at the end of the day is the most important aspect. Granted, you'd want it to be like, if I was a developer, yeah, sure, I'd love if everyone went and bought my game at full price. But if somebody went and bought it at, say, like half price or even less, I'd be still happy that they got to play it. I think particularly on digital purchases as well, because the one thing I'd be very annoyed about with regards to the one thing I'd be really targeting with stuff like this is let's take into account game stores that do trade-ins or you get a secondhand game. They're extremely detrimental to the gaming industry, because think about it this way: you go into GameStop and you buy a game from GameStop new. I think 60% of that will go to the actual developer and then 40% will go to the distributor, being GameStop. Somebody goes in and say you buy a secondhand copy of Days Gone. They get none of that. The developer gets nothing of a secondhand copy, because that's a game that, has been brought into GameStop. They're now just selling it again. That's the worst part about it. So sales on consoles are very much the digital equivalent of trying to get a game out there to people before these stores can get them physical copy. And I think games I think that's a really shady practice from GameStop as well. And I've never really liked GameStop with their practices when it comes to games and whatnot. But this in particular, I think, yeah, it's all great if we live in a perfect world and everyone buys something at full price, but we don't. People have money that they need to save. People want to try out a game before they commit to it. So that's why we have stuff like Game Pass. That's why we have sales on the store. I think at the end of the day, someone buying your game at a cheap price is still a win. and I don't think you should be giving out to people for doing that. Let's go on anyways to our indie game of the week. I have rambled throughout the entirety of this episode, and maybe that's for better or for worse, who knows. I might get some angry messages, but let's kind of go into more of a lighthearted subject that doesn't involve so much controversy. What's your sort of indie insight or indie game for the week, Connor?
Oh, I'm gonna have to shout out to Super Meat Boy Forever, because it has just come to, I believe, Steam and consoles, because I think it previously released on Nintendo Switch and I think the Epic Store, but now it's out everywhere else, I believe, and I've been playing it on my Xbox, and it's such a joy. Like, all the nostalgia I had of playing the original Super Meat Boy, because this one's... Have you played the original Super Meat Boy?
Yes, funnily enough, I got it, I think, on Xbox Arcade when it was... I think it was on Games with Gold at one point.
Have you played Forever yet?
No, I haven't played Forever yet.
So this one's different. It's you're no longer in control of like the movement. So you're basically on rails, because you're always running. So you're only in control of like one button, which is like the jump button.
Is this like Flappy Bird?
It's sort of like that, but you can obviously, if you jump off a wall, you like turn back, and then the game has like it generates chunks of level, and so every time you play a level, you'll never play exactly the same level twice, because it'll generate like different kind of developer curated chunks for you. And now, like, that may turn some people off, but actually, like, until you play it, you have no idea how fun it is, because like it like flips the original gameplay on its head and say, okay, we're only going to give you a jump button. Oh, and you have like a punch button as well, and you can play as either Meat Boy or Bandage Girl at the start. And it was like a true homage or tribute to the original game, because it had kind of all the same kind of themes and worlds, but like with a different riff on them. And so how it works is like you have switches where you switch your direction, and you can jump off walls to switch, and it's like you're constantly running, so you feel like you could do a whole level in like one sprint, and it's like really, it can get intense. And it's like the way the developers have made the levels, it's like they know what you're going to want to do when you come across like a set of obstacles, and they've planned to kill you as soon as you try and do that, and they force you to think a way around it, and they like challenge you to find solutions to the puzzles they make, and they always have like multiple like routes you can take and different things you can do to progress in the level. I had so much fun with it. Like the art style and the animation, like so cute. The soundtrack is like the heavy metal soundtrack makes like a return with like different tracks. It's all like such a nostalgia hit for like the first time I played Super Meat Boy, plus like everything I want from like a new Meat Boy game. I saw like a review on the store that said that they were really disappointed it wasn't like the same as the original, because obviously it's kind of like that. I don't know what to call it, but obviously it is like you're constantly running and you're not in control of that anymore. But for me, just the novelty of it just felt so new, and all the mechanics they could incorporate, because the game and the formula has changed. Like, it made it so fresh for me. And for only like, for me it's only like £16, so I can't convert that, but no, I definitely think it's worth picking up, because it was just like such a joy to play. Yeah,
definitely something I'll have to look into anyways. My game for this week anyways, I mentioned it previously in our last segment there, is DreadX Collection: The Hunt. It's an indie-based title anyways, and it's funny enough because my first exposure to it was they've done 4. This is the 4th in a collection of 4 at the moment, and it's very much based on the premise of getting indie developers in the horror genre together for sort of a game jam-esque sort of they create a different varied game with a specific theme over the course of a few nights. I think the original game had 10 developers developing a single scary game over 7 nights. This one is given a bit more leeway, 7 developers, but they have 20 nights to create sort of a first-person shooter horror game that all links together in one really beautifully culminated sort of story. I'll kind of briefly try and run through kind of what it's about. So I mentioned David Szymanski earlier. He's co-produced this with DreadXP, who set up there recently last year to sort of create the DreadX collection. They worked on this sort of core story of you're a hunter, I believe it was. At least that's the idea I got from interviewing one of the developers of the game, Dan McGrath, who said that was the original pitch they'd given to him. And you're this tracker who goes out to a sort of a snow base in the middle of a pandemic. Surprise, surprise! You know, people will be loving for stuff like that nowadays. So you go out and you find that the group in the base are all dead, and there seems to be something lurking, some creature, whatever, very reminiscent of The Thing. And there's a sort of a very cliched board with all these case files on it, sort of similar to something like X-Files or whatnot. And each file you go into presents you with one of the developers' games, which is meant to be one of the stories behind how they got these rare, horrific artifacts or something that come together in a broader plot scale later on down the line for the main game. But no, it's absolutely fantastic. The one thing about indie games is you always go into them and you never know what you're going to find. Like, I think it was really funny because one of the pitch is obviously a first-person shooter horror game. And I think one of the developers, Christopher Yabsley, or no, it's not Christopher Yabsley, it was Philosophic Games. He took the shooting element to a different level and had you going around hunting ghosts with a camera by taking pictures of them, quite literally shooting them. So I thought that was a really interesting play on this whole idea as well. So it's fantastic. It's really good, and it's it only retails for about €10. The previous DreadX collections retail for even less than that. So it's well worth checking out for anyone who might be interested in, you know, a quick scare. Let's get on to the final segment of the show this evening. Something we saw this week that we liked. I believe, Connor, you don't have anything for this, do you?
No, sorry, I came unprepared.
No, it's all right. It's I kind of threw this in almost at the last second, this part of the show anyways, because I saw something this week and I was like, I really want to talk about this, but it's not kind of in one of our segments yet. So why not do what everyone does and just create a segment for it? So I saw this week, obviously, Master Chief Collection is on PC now. It hasn't got full mod support yet, but we've seen various iterations of people releasing mods for the game. And I saw a really interesting mod this week. It's a Call of Duty inspired zombies mod for Halo 3. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, Connor.
Yeah, I've seen it. Although I haven't watched any footage of it, but I've saw loads of people tweeting about it.
It's really sort of reminiscent of I remember when I was younger, always going onto Forge, trying to make a zombies map of whatnot, sticking the walls on the guns on the wall and whatnot. But this actually takes it to a whole new level. You have a point system involved. It's very what's the word I'm looking for? Very unpolished, but I suppose that's to be expected with mods. Made by Crisp, I believe is the name of the modder anyways, and it takes place in Halo's opening mission, Sierra 117, and the jungle map element. I downloaded it off Nexus Mods. It was really easy to install. I think it's really worth trying out if you've maybe retired MCC for a bit and you're looking for something to get you back into it, because it's kind of similar to Firefight in a way, but has these all new segments, even has its own mystery box and whatnot. But you know, I thought it was a really interesting thing that I just wanted to briefly mention before we finished up the show.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that someone's done that. I have to check that out now.
I suppose we'll finish off there then anyways. This was our first week for Rapture Radio Rewind. I hope you all enjoyed. As always, you can find the links to our social medias linked below. And if you want to come and talk to us over on Discord, there will be a link to our server as well. Let us know down in the comments about what you thought about any of the stories we discussed this week, or whether you disagreed with any of the points we brought up this week. With that being said though, thank you all for watching, and we will see you all next time.